Hey there, it's been a minute. Been a minute. Dr. Lisa here, Owning Her Health Podcast, Season 7. If you did not listen to episode 96 yet, I want you to. I hate saying stop because this is a wonderful episode with Dr. Monique Caruth and her health agency and her self agency in owning who she is as a woman, her the whole picture as a Caribbean woman, as a black woman, as a lesbian woman, as a woman leaving the need for identification through her titles and her many achievements. But I almost want you to, if you are a bit confused because season 6 seemed like really fast and you sort of like missed it. You're not crazy. There's a bridge conversation to be had between season 6 and season 7, and that's over on episode 96 if you're wondering. But we are focused on season 7 here as we start the new year. The Curvy Hustle runs from it runs on a seasonal timeline that makes much more sense. We begin in the spring and we end in the winter on a 4-season path. And so, with the spring equinox in the third week of March, came in our new year. So, we're 1 month or so into, as I'm recording this, 1 month in to our Q1 as everyone moves into their Q2. And that really goes to talk about some of the things I spoke with Dr. Caruth today with, as I spoke to Monique about her evolution. We were talking about that it is an evolution and that it runs on Kairos time. And if you're not familiar with Chronos and Kairos time, that was introduced by the Greeks in terms of setting the conversation in time management. And so Chronos time is what we're all familiar with, right? The chronological time of seconds, minutes, hours, months, years, and there being this sort of finite urgency to that conversation. And that's not wrong. That's a way for us to, again, it's more in terms of form and structure and containers. And that's how our brain, on a very logical, left side ness to ourselves, our more masculine structure and form, cause and effect, polarity type of thinking goes. Fast, slow, start, finish, that sort of thinking. So it's not wrong, but there is a Kairos time, and that time is season cycles, more of along our intuitive containers and tapping into nature. Nature itself and the universe itself runs on a Kairos time. It doesn't care when we want to get done and when we want to start things. We can push by sheer will and chronologically set our steps and our goals and our outcomes to a specific time. But how many times have you willpowered yourself to the wrong thing at the wrong time, or the wrong person at the wrong time, right? Or the wrong person walking in at maybe the right time for something else, but because you are so urgent in your days and months and years, things need to get done, you opened yourself up to some chaos, right? Likewise, how many people maybe have been completely on Kairos time in terms it's not the right time, it's not the right season, it's not the right, it's never going to be exactly the right time in terms of a perfectionist type of mentality. We're never going to be exactly where we want to be at the exact perfect time, because perfectionism itself is a non-reality. And there is a concept of, instead of that polarity and that left brain speak, there is a right brain intuitive duality where we can entertain through our own process that two different things can be true at the same space at the same time. And that I know is not a conversation for maybe somebody who's very analytically, very left-brained, very needs a box and a form, but there needs to be a function that's attached, and that's attached to Kairos time. And so if we want form and function, we need to use both. And we need to understand that the functionality needs to come in, which means in terms of our productivity, is it productive to get married to the wrong person at the right time for you to get married on your 30-year plan? Is that actually productive? If in the end you're going to spend, 10 or 15 years in recovery from getting married to the wrong person at your right time. And I'll flip it and say, is it the right thing, the right time to get married to the right person? Or I will say it, is it ever the wrong time to get married to the right person? I don't believe so. I think when you get married to the right person, you guys create an alchemic sort of new timeline, and you will make that the right timeline. So there's a bigger conversation. And Monique and I got into her personal evolution and needing it to just be the time. The time. And we're both having the conversations right now. We had met a couple of years ago when she was pretty newbie coming out of school and just sort of finding her own identity and authority to even go into her own practice, where we crossed paths. But what I saw in her now and approached in her now was I saw finally sort of her mavenness emerging through. I saw, there's just some seasons of life we have to mature into, and an awareness and a wisdom that others can see when we get there. And we can't force that. That's why the 12-year-old and the whole kind of Brooke Shields recent conversation and, in Pretty Baby and her being sort of forced to grow up in the industry, and she didn't understand how she was being sexualized, and she was just kind of going to work or whatever. Like, it was a timeline in sort of the season and where we were as a humanity and where we were as a culture, where only a few of us might have looked at Pretty Baby at the time she did it in the, the late 70s, early 80s, where before her Calvin Klein launched her, we might have looked at all of that and launching her Calvin Klein ads and her whole entire, brand and her modeling, going from baby to younger to getting her in Blue Lagoon or whatever. We might have looked at that 80s and 90s and even early 2000s mindset and been like, yeah, she, that's exactly it. It was the right thing to do at the right time. She was in the right place at the right time. She had the right people working for her. But years later, it wasn't the time. We could look at that now and be like, oh my God, it's like child pornography. What were we thinking liking that movie? What were they doing making that movie? Who was that guy? Ew. Right? Well, because, we had to have the 2018 period of Me Too movement. So we speak to that a little bit, but I speak to that a lot more in the episode 96 bridge conversation. So if that's interesting to you, that aspect of this conversation with Dr. Monique Caruth out of just outside Baltimore in the Maryland area, then I recommend you go on over there. In terms of Dr. Caruth, as I introduce her in this conversation, and her intersectionality as it be, I want you to be really listening into the layers of her personal transformation and how that now has given her voice authority, her fifth level authority, to really sort of start marketing herself, not just through her being a physical therapist or a doctor of physical therapy, and not just then being her agency and an owner and an entrepreneur, but now her being a contributing human being. And that's the phases of going sort of from our ignorance and our awareness opening, as I talk on the Sacred Success Path, to acceptance, to the atonement, which we also talk about in this episode. What did we have to do with our own personal course corrections And that has nothing to do with punishment. That's a religious misdefinition that they gave you for control. But in the spiritual sense of course correcting out of our own ethos, clearing and cleansing ourselves of the ignorance, so that every opportunity, everything, what you end up doing through the atonement is that you stop being afraid of making mistakes. And then that really steps into your authority, which we then discuss, her stepping into her authority, and how that is now the way to just get easy abundance. In fact, something that we didn't talk about on the show is when we were getting on the podcast and having our conversation, she was sort of on the phone, she was saying sorry, but I guess her phone messages have blown up because of the fact of what I just said. When you start making a shift, since we had talked about me witnessing her in this new light and her making her identity shift, which we talk a lot about in previous episodes, that identity, that vital identity shift from our sense of maidenhood and power authority in that single individualist way into the collective, both through our sense of mothering and nurturing, which she got through her career, as well as how we bring that into society, because that's usually what gets us all screwed up. We kind of just funnel it into our parenting and our romantic relationships, and we don't know how to bring that into our business endeavors and our career, because there's such a backlash of that, and there's the sexual innuendo because of people who can't control their primal reflexes or primal senses. And then there's also the what is expected, right, in a patriarchy society. And we lose that ability to just nurture, and we get guarded. And then and then when we start to really owning that aspect of health in ourselves, we get to then move into the maven, and that's what I saw of her, and that's what we'll discuss is, that real sense. And when we get to that fifth level authority in terms of our voice, and that it means something, minus the credentials, minus just from our story and the person we've had to become through the process of our own evolution and elevations, then we really start owning her health. So without further ado, here's episode 97 of Owning Her Health with Dr. Monique Caruth.
Welcome to this episode of Owning Her Health with your host, Dr. Lisa Holland, PT. Join Lisa as she starts the conversation on what it really takes to become a healthy, wealthy, and whole CEO of your life. Listen in to real talk by real lady leaders in all walks of life as they open up on personal health stories, wealth, career, and feminine abundant living. We'll walk the goddess path less traveled together to respectfully debate, supportively co-create, and wildly celebrate the unique passion, gratitude, and impact only a connection with women in wise counsel can provide. Learn how to grow by owning your body, expanding your mind, and aligning your soul with the purpose only you can pursue in this world. Happiness begins with owning her health right now.
Welcome, everyone, to another Owning Her Health episode. Thank you so much for being here for my 7th season. Monique is going to be, I decided she's going to be in my 7th season.
Lucky seven.
Lucky 7. Let me tell you, it's the end of a lot of BS. The last 7 years have been a lot of BS for a lot of people. Mainly the people who are in leadership right now, who really need to step up to their authority. I think a lot of people have been, those of you who are listening to, if you've listened to me, and I thank you so much, from that very first podcast on Halloween that I recorded in 2016, I think I put that up in January of 2017, it's been a whirlwind for me, but I think a lot of people have felt that whirlwind in the past, obviously 4 years with the pandemic and this and that. And I've had the beauty, because at the time when I was coming in and using this podcast, it was to go into my Mind Body Brand Academy, and I was starting to do some mentorship in terms of entrepreneurship and sort of leading with your own authority, particularly for women. But I've been watching Monique sort of in the circles of coming out of her own into her own authority, out of like just student mentality and sort of newbie kind of thing into her own leadership. And I've recently reached out to her because I saw her moving into her own personal authority, which anyone who's been listening to me knows, like, that is you owning your health, not just your wealth and talking about the bag and how you're best at this and all your letters. But when I see a goddess fire coming out, that's alchemizing that sort of personal authority in both that masculine world and that feminine sort of like leadership, which is quiet. It's the tides, right? It's like the moon versus the sun. It's the pushing underneath and causing, and letting you know the storm is coming and setting it up and warning everyone. And a lot of people don't hear that or whatever. So I saw that sort of blossom with Monique coming out into sort of her leadership and changing her brand a little bit and taking more authority into her name and not just what she was doing in the world with her positioning. And so I reached out and said, hey, do you want to be on Owning Her Health like I often do? And sort of, she said yes. So I'm so happy and grateful to have her here because I think we're going to have a really great conversation. So thank you so much, Monique, for being here. Dr. Caruth is a doctor of physical therapy, but even more than that, an owner and physiotherapist in terms of enterprise design. And I love what she did with thinking of it that way, because that was always the conversation I was trying to have for people is like, let's just not be a clinic or be a personal brand, but let's think in enterprise, because what are we going to do beyond this? Especially for women, as life curves, we tend to be the ones that are going to end up having to adjust to care for our parents, adjust to care for our families we're making, the next generation. And I see you going into that authority, which with the historical Black colleges and universities and being proud of that. So like that's going to be sort of, that's what I meant by owning the feminine, whatever package and however you want to label yourself. But she has the label of owner and physiotherapist, but doctor of physical therapy, and how she's owning that has been to kind of make a Caruth health agency, making an agency. And she's a physiotherapist, but like she has an agency, and I just loved that, and sort of freeing herself from the confines of just being a clinician, but taking that authority into other things. And I think there's so much conversation just in a doctor of physical therapy conversation, like, hello, thank you for doing it. Thank you for using doctor in your authority instead of just complaining how you can't use it. Really just kind of, I know you're outside Baltimore, and I know you're probably in that whole conversation too, in terms of changing people's mindsets to what their level of healthcare should be, and what they should get. So thank you so much for being here. I know I've kind of spoken of you in all the flowery essence of what you can be, but where do you come from into this conversation? What's your conversation? How did you get here? How did you get into physical therapy? And then sort of think of what made you think, let me just have an agency. And then what are you now doing with it? What's your conversation now? So kind of give me a little arc of how you went from who you were and where you grew up and came into this, because I don't see this enough and I love it. I don't see this enough and I love it.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for that really in-depth and I'm humbled, the introduction that you give.
It's how I see you. It's how I see you, and I think a lot of other people need to too.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. It's crazy because I knew from a teenager around 13 watching a cricket game with my dad in a home, very small home. I had a close family, raised by my mom and dad, and I have two younger sisters. And I love sports, and that's one way that my dad and I really bonded through football and cricket. Well, you guys call it soccer. And one of my favorite players from India got injured during a game, and I saw this guy run out with a big bag and worked with him, and all of a sudden he was better, and he went on to score a century that's over 100 runs. and they won the match. And I was like, you know what, this is what I want to be. I had no idea what it was, but I just saw physiotherapist at the bottom of the title, and I was like, this is what I'm gonna be. I mean, no one knew what it was. In a typical Caribbean household, you either had to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. So those were the three careers that most people usually guided their kids towards. So I had to do a lot of research on my own. I was fortunate that I did have an Indian physiotherapist that was on contract at the hospital, the local hospital. So I was able to shadow her for a while. But my interest, honestly, was to just be a sports physio. So I did leave my family home in 1999, and I chose to come to the US. My parents didn't really have the funds, so I had to choose a university that offered me a full scholarship, and that's how I ended up in the US. And 25 years later, it's full circle. It's surreal that I am not a sports physical therapist, a sports physiotherapist. I am in home health. And there's a lot to do with that too, because I did start off after graduation in orthopedic physical therapy outpatient. Worked for a group of surgeons. It was a really great experience. But as I evolved and I grew, because I think my life at the time, because you met me while I was still like a new grad student.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
all in that whole
and
like 2018,
yeah, I was
whatever that
a
was.
fairly new grad. And you know, the emphasis then was on the title, being a physical therapist. And I read a book that said begin with the end in mind, and it Stephen Covey, and it made me really think. And I have a really close friend who always joked with me because I always led with the introduction that I'm this and this, and she was like, you know what, your life shouldn't be revolved around a title. That's not who you are. And I didn't get it at the time, but as life circumstances continued to evolve and I got into home health and started having these one-on-one interactions with patients and seeing a different side, I was like, wow, there is something more. So going back to becoming, before I decided that I wanted to be a physiotherapist, like around the time of confirmation, going to confirmation classes, the priest at the time, Father Berkeley, who is now the bishop for the church back at home, he saw something in me and he's like, you know what? Why don't you start doing these sermons? Or so I was basically like a lay minister, because he said, you have a gift of motivating people and just using circumstances to tie it into everyday life. You should continue to do it. And I was afraid because I was like, I don't know if I could speak that well or be in front of people. And I was like, they would judge me because, at the time I was still sort of insecure about my sexuality and who I was and being from the Caribbean. So I felt people would judge me and not respect the message that I had to give. But now I'm embracing all of that. I'm embracing the fact that I'm an immigrant, I'm Black, I'm gay, and I'm a woman, and it's all coming to play in helping to inspire other people who are in that situation. Now, I took a trip after my dad died suddenly, 4 years ago now, because I was still grieving, and I was like, what is it with a legacy? Going to an HBCU at Howard University, they taught about legacy. And I took a trip and I noticed that all the stores that were there were last names. The Hermes, the Louis Vuittons, everything was last name. And I was like, what am I doing? It's not just physical therapy I'm doing. Why not change it to Caruth Staffing and have the last name? And with healthcare in home health, it's not just only physical therapy.
Right.
We employ occupational therapists, we employ speech therapists, we employ social work. Every discipline has a part to play in making someone better. And That's why I didn't just restrict it to physical therapy. Beyond that, people connect with stories. I realized that one of the biggest things to getting people not to cancel appointments, to follow through on their plan of care, to welcome you into their home, which is a safe place for most people, is that connection with stories. They want to be able to have hope, to have faith that things are going to get better. Even if they know they have like a progressive or terminal condition, at least someone is coming in there to give them some sort of ability to smile or be grateful for just even breathing. Um, there are many patients that I had that when I say, "How are you today?" they're like, "Hey, I'm 6 feet, 6 feet over, not six
Right.
feet under." And I was like, you know what? That's a blessing. So it's an underrated blessing that many people take for granted. So I have been blessed that I can now embrace all those qualities that I felt were a strike against me, to realize that they are now the pillars that are holding me up to champion me through each stage that I'm going through life.
I love that story. And you have so exemplified why I was like, she's a career hustler. She needs to be on this show because my three pillars are leadership,
Mm-hmm.
relationship, and enterprise design. Now, enterprise could be, it's a mindset, but it's also a movement, and it is going to make legacy. Now, that could be you talking on your own little podcast, that could be you in your own little office, that could be you working for someone else, but there's a thought leadership behind it, and that's like what I heard from you. And I love that. And as you were talking, I'm like, yes, like this is the time, right? Because one of the things I like to talk about is with women, we're designed for a kairos kind of time versus the chronos time. And chronos and kairos, for those of you who are listening that might not be familiar with that, is sort of Greek thought of how they conceive time. And there's the seconds, the minutes, the structure, the maybe more, in the containers, in more quote unquote the masculine energy of kind of form and structure and containment into these like bite-sized things of time. And we've been so conditioned to how the productivity in our life and how we run our lives, right? Like we need the title by this, and we need this, and we need this by this, like as terms of, are we being productive? Are we going to leave legacy? Are we doing the thing? And there's the kairos time, which has been underappreciated, which is develop it. We embody it. We have cycles, like when am I going to get my period? Like I kind of, if I'm tuned into myself, if I am being healthy, I kind of understand it. I see differences in how I'm functioning. Our energy management is on a 30-day thing. We haven't been allowed to live like that. When's the greatest week to go do that work on our grieving? When's the greatest week to go give these presentations and whatever? We've been kind of just managing ourselves. And then there's the alchemy of it. And that's what I heard from you. You are now this embodiment of the alchemy of all of that. My cycles, my seasons, my story, and the seconds and the minutes and the this and the that you're spending with people, being very present in the moments that you have. And that's such a strength in leadership. That to me is leadership. There's integrity, there's character development, but it's also relationship, right? It ties into our relationship. And what I heard from you is that you started having a relationship with yourself, and it changed the relationships you were having with others, and therefore you could change the way you went into the outer. And those are, again, concepts that it's not just relationship is not just me and you, it's
Yeah.
me. I've got to bring me. Who am I bringing to the table? And when we talk about personal brand and all of this, so much, my whole entire academy was like, that was it. Like, it was like trying to even get that. I had people in there 3 years till we got that. 3 years coming back, like till we got, who are you? What are you? And can I go into it? Never mind what's my freaking marketing, right? Because you're selling something else. So how can you relate to that? Like, how can you relate to what I said in terms of your journey into like even enterprising? Did you find that like you had to, once you found who you were, the rest sort of came much more naturally? You attracted it, manifested it per se?
Yes, one of the biggest things of blocking what you want in life is being too concerned about what others would think of you, and judging you. And you're basically judging yourself. And judging yourself like that, you're not loving yourself. You're not embracing what makes you unique. And when I fully embraced who I was and adopted a mindset of being, hey, the love that you give to others, give it to yourself. When you wake up, I mean, I had stuff written in the mirror to remind myself. I bought three small separate pots. One pot says, "Sometimes you forget you are awesome, so this is your reminder." And I started with a small plant, so over time it would grow. And I used to believe I didn't have a green thumb because every plant that I had before died. Now, if I show you my house, you'd see. Look, it's like
That's the perfect example, right? You
it's like green.
manifest the world you believe.
Yeah,
Your identity was a plant killer, and so you became a plant killer.
yeah. So I mean, I'm like, damn, you have a green thumb. I mean, all your plants are thriving. And I started seeing that, you know what? As stuff started to grow around me, I started feeling better. I started looking better. Uh, Spiritually, I was getting better. I Things that I didn't really accept before I take the time to notice, like spending time in nature and just enjoying stuff. And I'm like, you know what? You have some really good ideas. Just put it out there. It doesn't matter how people react to it. You don't have to do everything everybody else is doing to build a personal brand. Just be you. And I started doing that, going on solo trips, um, going even by myself, just enjoying it, being
And
mindful in the
sharing that.
moment.
Like I
Yeah,
remember you sharing that when you went on a
yeah,
cruise or something like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I even took trip nowhere and to somewhere I've never been before, and just enjoying it. Just doing, waking up, doing stuff randomly, and you enjoy that. Just being, even when you go out on a coffee date or something with someone, turning your phone down or turning it off and just being mindful of the conversation that you're having. And I started doing
Yes.
that with patients, as well too. And people start realizing, you know what, she's really actively listening. This is good. I feel safe. So my relationships got better with people. So you got it. It all starts with you. Once I realized that, I started changing that mindset and thinking more positively and letting go of the self-doubt. It's always going to be there. You're going to always
Right.
have doubts. You're going to always have fears, but just, replace them. Those are just thought distortions. That's what I call them. So I
Yeah.
just use positive affirmations and mindfulness to try to, redirect myself and be like, hey, you know what, focus, you got this, you got this, you got
And
this.
that's so important because you're setting the tone. And
Yeah.
then, talking like two physical therapists here, we can kind of like when people have a high tone, and for those of you who might not, when you see people with a really rigid, maybe they have Parkinson's or they had a
Mm.
stroke or something, that's what we're talking about, where there's like this resistance, so we call it cogwheel. But if you
Mhm.
kept pressure, if you kept a steady pressure that wasn't going to break their arm, they would give. And it would
Yep.
give and they would open up. And the same thing with like babies like that, when they're so upset or whatever, I'm trying to relate this to how people might see this in their own lives. You see this is real. We're not just talking positive affirmation or whatever. Sometimes life is hard. I always told people, because my brand that I came out was the Belly Guru. And it was about this
Mm.
conversation of like, it started as sort of fertility through the postpartum year, because I felt like it was a 2-year thing that everybody was trying to condense into like 40 weeks.
Mhm.
And one of the things I would relate to them at the time was saying how, like, not just the phases of birth and whatever, and the fact that they were going to be a mother, whether this was a successful pregnancy or not. Like they already kind of, and so many times we've taken on this identity, like you said, of like through the process. Sometimes we need to kind of remove that, right? Like we need to remove that. And the way we do that is through our behaviors. Because even like,
Yeah.
in the spiritual text, like in the Bible, they say, prayers without actions, or, you could pray all you want, but like, God's not going to give you something to do that needs to get done unless he knows you're ready to do it. The
Yep.
accountability needs to be there. You could be the most responsible perfectionist person in the world, but if you're not going to hold yourself accountable for not getting it done, you're always going to have an excuse. Never going to have the time, never going to have the day. Somebody else is going to need you, especially if you're a big heart. And I love how you kind of express that, because you can't have relationships with other people until you have that accountability and authority relationship with yourself. You can't have, even if you get authority from other people by your titles, we see this all the time, right? Especially in the sports world, they get this like salary or whatever they're given, this authority, and they're not ready. And everything doesn't matter how much they were trained, doesn't matter who's pumping into them there. And it happens with healing. We see this. And so I love kind of how you said you started seeing that, just treating people with that respect and that presence,
Yep.
that presence and being able to, and I actually think, I don't know what you think about this, Monique, but I think that's sort of like the mothering part that we can use. And I'm not saying it's available for everyone, but where do we see it? And it's not being where we're doing everything for them. I think that's unfortunately where people have taken that mothering authority. But it's like there's the maiden where it's like fiery and I'm going to go do it and whatever, and I'm going to meet it. And then there's that mothering side that needs to be there in relationship and playing with that. And then there's the maven and the wisdom, which I reached out because I saw you starting to blossom into that. And I'm starting to really want to have conversations with people before they're in menopause or post-menopause or whatever, because it starts to blossom, just like the mothering starts to blossom.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It definitely, I do agree with the mothering part. Because mothers, their intuition are good. They're very nurturing. It's funny because like when I was a kid, when someone would come to our house, before they even like cross the front door, my mom would call whoever name. Usually it was me. But I'm like, damn, why would she think it was me? But yes, as I said, usually it was me. But a mother knows her children. And depending on the circumstances or the report that they've been given, they will know who was guilty or who isn't. So she could confidently defend, or she would be like, you know what, I agree, this needs to be done. And accountability was very important in my family from a very young age. So that's something that I value as well too. Yeah, so
yeah,
I agree. Yeah, there is a mothering side to it.
yeah, there
Because
is.
you have to be able to nurture relationships, and mothers tend to be very detailed. They see the details. Fathers tend to be the big picture kind of thing,
Right, the
but the
big
mothers will,
picture,
yeah,
sort of, they want to prepare you for the storm.
yeah,
Again, working on that structure and that sort of like being strong enough, right? They'll build the
yeah,
house for you. They'll get you into the education.
yeah,
But like in terms of like, so what? So what do we do
yeah,
when we're there,
yeah.
right?
Get
All
the
right.
books. We need to get the pencils. The mothers will look
Exactly.
at all the
Exactly.
details.
Then like, are you going to do your homework? And that uncomfortable conversation
Yeah,
when you
yeah,
don't want to do your homework. That
yeah.
uncomfortable conversation. Like I can beat it out of you. But honestly, isn't it better if we have this conversation where I sort of like see my talents and what I'm doing and I'm part of it? And that's definitely mother. Oh God. So okay. So yeah. So as we get sort of into like our mavenhood and that energy, that it's not just, again, it's not just in the Kairos time of a certain time period. It's sort of in that, or in the Chronos time of it. It's in that Kairos sort of the seasons of it. And the way I talk about the Curvy Hustle is, I don't think it's a straight path where you got to go 1 to 2 to 3, and if you go to 2, it's backwards. I actually think sometimes we're learning, and what we learn at 4, we realize, we get the awareness and say, I got to go back to 2. And then we're able to leap to 7, because we made those choices. So one thing I like to ask everyone when they're on my show is, if you could talk, because I think part of being in our mavenhood is when we start to want to sort of share this in the sisterhood or with anyone else, like we start thinking of that legacy, like, what am I leaving bigger than me, beyond me? Um, so if you could right now, because I do believe that sort of we're on sort of multiple dimensions. And I think of myself sometimes when I'd be as a kid and I was praying to God and I was thanking Jesus and all this other stuff. But there was this sort of like, I almost think looking back, I was maybe talking to the older me was sort of talking back to me, like this sort of like older, wiser sense of me when I look back and see where everything sort of went, who knew more. So like right now you're in that place for the you of like a decade or 50 or that 15-year-old you, right? Sitting in where you were in a different country or whatever. What would you like to say now, put out there in the ethers? What would you talk to and tell that younger version of you now from what you know now, if you could?
It's funny because my grandparents used to want me be careful what you pray for, ask for, and
Mm-hmm.
but I think in a sense they they could see me being where I am today, but it was scary of what I had to go through, and probably even the people that it would piss off or bring out the worst in.
Yeah.
So in that aspect, I think that part scared, in particular, one of my grandmothers. But she was a very prayerful woman, and she passed that on to my mom, who is her daughter. But I would commend a 15-year-old me for dreaming big, um,
Mm.
for going against the grain and being strong enough to withstand all the attacks, whether it was emotionally, spiritually, that came by, and sticking through it, even on the days that you cried, it was okay. But to also be patient. Fast forwarding to the 25-year-old me still in college, because I started college late, as I did have to get scholarships and save up money. So, most people around that age want to look for like a partner, thinking about a career, all that stuff. And here I am still in school, and I'm like, am I behind? Am I
I keep
behind?
trying to tell my 25-year-old daughter, because she came out of school, she stayed an extra semester. It was during the whole COVID thing. She,
Yeah.
it was also, she went into school, and that's when my divorce started and stuff. So she's gone through stuff, and she's, not necessarily where some of her friends that graduated with her,
Mm.
are. And I keep trying to convince her of this, of like, gosh, you're 25, you're so young, like you don't have to have all, like, I know she's looking at everybody on that traditional sort of whatever.
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
she looks at me because at her age, I was having her at like, 27 years old, and I was already married 2 years. But I also know she knows how that turned out for me. Like, like it was too soon to decide who I'm going to be with the rest of my life and stuff. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And I cherish that young Monique who was so courageous to like, be like, there's just something in me, right?
Yep.
That's a thing
Yep.
when we say like potential. One of my gifts that I have is I could see people's potential before they do.
Yeah.
And that's been great in healthcare because you can see the other, get them. But sometimes people don't, like, they're so foreign from that. And it's people in
Yeah.
your family or whatever that
Yeah.
they didn't, it's almost threatening to them, right? Like it's threatening because
Mm.
if they believe you, then they have no excuse. Like if you
Yeah.
can do it,
But
then they can't, and they can't do it. Now all of a sudden their identity is getting trampled by your new identity. So like understanding that in the process you're still in, what if we flipped it and we said, okay, 10 years down the road, Caruth, health agencies, wonderful. You're stepping into this leadership with your own personal talking and sort of your own ministry that might develop around you in terms of whatever you end up doing. What do you think she's like? What do you get hints of that she's trying to tell you that you're sort of resistant right now, or might not believing, but you're seeing it or whatever? What is she telling you right now that you need to hear?
every day may not be good, but as I'm discovering every single day, your purpose is found in the process. The process may be hard, it may be tough, some days may be easier, but you will discover your purpose for each season in the process. Okay?
Yeah,
So,
I know. I love that. That might end up be the title. The purpose is the process, right?
yeah.
Because that is so important. So much of life is the living,
Yep.
and I know through my own, anyone who's just listening to this that might not know what I've been through, like part of my coming up was realizing like I was in a marriage that was, it was great for the priority of family or whatever, but it was that older woman sort of seeing where she was going after she had the family. Like, it's like I almost like at 20 years old could only conceive my life up to being about, 40. I remember it was 50. Like, I can never see my 40s. It was so funny. I had this vision. I was like, this is what I'm going to do in my 20s. This is what I'm going to do in my 30s. This is how, I was like, I'm going to have my kids so that in my 50s, I'm like done with that phase. And I always sort of knew I'm going to be, I didn't know what it was, but like, that's when I'm really going to break out. And I'm really going to make that legacy or whatever it is that was going to be. But I never could see my 40s. And gosh willing, if God would have shown me what my damn 40s were going to end up, I would have never done it. I would have been like off that boat. I would have been like, so sometimes it's like the wiser of us can only tell us, like, as much as we want to know, we really have to be from this moment on being very present and open to that awareness, but like not looking for us to always know. Like, I think in my 20s or as my teens, that was just me being in control and how I grew up and needing control and thinking that was power. And it was also the third wave feminism teaching that to me, like control is power and have, but really it's a, inauthentic use of power, right? It's like control is not really when you're actually, feel powerless, probably like you feel somehow you need the control in that. And I think our older, wiser maven self knows that already, and it can only, and luckily, hopefully we get to be mature enough where, and I think this somehow magically starts happening. I always say 38. 38 seems to be like around 37, 38. I feel like 35 is just maybe if we've had kids, we might get it through them. But like, but it seems like we know on our 40th birthday. We know on our 40th
definitely in
birthday.
your 40s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. When you turn 40, things definitely, your tolerance for BS definitely diminishes. You want to be in spaces where you're welcome and that you'll be allowed to thrive. And I'm also noticing that's when most of my friends who were married in their 20s and stuff tend to be going through marital issues, because the 20-year-old them is not the 40-year-old them. And unfortunately, when someone has gotten used to you being that way, and it's not to say that you won't still be a great wife or a great mom,
Right.
but
You have
you
to
just
both
want to step
change. You have to
into, yes,
both change.
yes, you want to step into your element. You've given so much of your time to your marriage and to your kids. You just want to be like, hey, let me love me, let me take care of me, let me be me. And that's usually it's heightened when you're,
Yeah.
as you said, 38, 39, 40. Being in control is different for me now. I used to feel like being in control was, yes, going, getting the doctorate degree, starting a business, doing this. But being in control now is being mindful, increasing self-awareness, increasing emotional intelligence. So when you master those things, you do have control, because people cannot easily manipulate you
And
or
they're
sway
always
you.
trying to. They're always
Yeah.
trying to. That's what you start to
And
realize.
yeah, and you realize, like, no matter the season, and having control is like trees, okay? One of my favorite psalms is like, um, God planted me like a tree, near fertile ground
Yes.
and flowing waters. But all trees go through seasons. You have spring where you bloom, you have the summer, you continue living your life, going in your flow. Then you have the fall. You start losing things. And then in the winter you hibernate so you could spring again.
And
So
allowing
life,
yourself to
yeah.
hibernate.
So life is like that. And you know, people have their favorite seasons. And you'll have your favorite people show up for you during different seasons. You just have to know who's worth keeping in your life, and being in control, having that self-awareness helps you to stay in control of
Right.
where you're going to be heading. So
I love
um
that because I see it as like there's layers, right? But you don't
yeah.
understand the layers. And I think sometimes, we've made friend groups, we've made people family or whatever that maybe, are not traveling with us into
Yeah.
their own authority and into their own, because there's like the whole season of life too, right? Like, and so, one of my stories is my mother passed before she was 60 at
Mhm.
59 from ovarian cancer, but it really wasn't ovarian cancer. It was like a lot of mismanagement and, and her life and, like we make the cancers in this. I fully, I know people
Mhm.
get really triggered by that, but I think like we're open. It's an immune system issue. And anytime the immune system fails, it's somewhat how we're living, what we're around, what we think of ourselves, how, how we manage first symptoms and things like that. And I just saw myself saying, if I only had, she was diagnosed at 55 and then lived till 59. And honestly, she should have lived more, but there was her mindset and everything like that. And I said, I'm sitting here teaching women all of this stuff and empowerment and whatever. And I had that shift and I was like, how do I want to live my own life? And sometimes, yeah, it's that hard thing of like realizing like, who's going to let me do that? And who's not able to let me do it? Like, it's just a capacity issue. It's not, and then you got to put them sort of on different layers of you because we are energetic beings. Like we're living it, we will be corrupted or empowered by the system. And it's getting to a place of being able to recognize that's our power in being able to decide who's close, who's not, how do we work, how do we take off when we sometimes have to be, interacting with certain things. And I think that just comes from a livedness. Like again, it's not even just how many years we are, but I think that there's a lot of walking dead walking around, praying for salvation one day to be alive when they're dead on while they're here, and that's not the story. So
Yeah, it's basically like you look good on paper, but in reality
yeah, they're
it's
not
just
living,
like,
and you
yeah.
can, and you get to a point, I think, in your 40s, like I haven't spoken to enough men,
Mm,
not that I haven't spoken to a lot of men, but just enough men who can tell me, because I think maybe they're put into authority, what I was talking about, right? Before they do their own atonements and they're put into authority and even get maybe some, the last, circle on my sacred success path is that abundance and that prosperity. Maybe they get it so early, sort of entitlements that maybe, and then it gets so late, when they're in their 40s. These are our power years, or at least we're sort of programmed that they could be. If we weren't
mhm.
deciding to have babies at 50 just because we can, we might be able to kind of have that. We
Yeah.
have this confusion sort of in our what was our power flex, and but we're learning that and we're trying to figure it out. But guys have not been taken on that voyage with us. They haven't had 50 years of this conversation. So I sometimes think we have this confusion in them, and they're actually looking for women who have figured it out, that
Mhm.
alchemy, that blend of just being a human being with a full authority and full accountability and full atonement and full ability to sort of wave into, if not the mothering, the fathering. Can I choose how I redo that? Can I do
Mhm.
that different? Because that's really what we've done, right? We saw like one sort of mothering, and then we said, well, maybe I want to mother in a different way because I know my mother didn't mother herself enough. Maybe we want to take that on to ourselves. So, if you're successful in all that, in anything I've said and sort of seen this or whatever, what's your impact? What is Caruth Agency? What is your own just talking and ministry or whatever? where can we find you? Like, how could we get more of you right now, Monique? Because I think people who are in this conversation are seeing you as I see you as a natural leader. You know, how can they communicate with you and get support from you right now, either professionally or personally, or just even in your
Um,
vision? Where are you taking this? You know, that you're willing to share. You don't have to share everything, but
well, as I said before, I can separate myself from the title of physical therapy and the business, but I realize for in order to leave a legacy, I have to separate myself from the business and allow the agency, Caruth Staffing Agency, to survive beyond me. So Caruth Staffing Agency has a separate handle at Caruth Staffing on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Myself, Dr. Monique J. Caruth, um, which I don't know how it happened, but I just happened to name a company after myself. But
because you
again,
knew
foresight,
there was
foresight,
something
yes.
in you. Yeah.
Foresight. So I can be found on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as at Dr. Monique Caruth. And on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, I do a daily Monday through Friday motivational posts because, as we shared earlier in this podcast, that your mindset matters. And I believe beautiful days begin with a beautiful mindset. So you have to start it off positively. So I make sure I'm consistent every morning that I post before 8 o'clock, a motivational message based on something that may have happened to me a few minutes before or maybe the week before. So I I want people to take trans follow like and read it. It may apply to you, it may not, but you can also share with other people that you think that it can apply to. It's relatable everyday messages. But career staffing is just going to focus on health, home health. um, I want in 5 to 10 years, and we're getting the notoriety now about it, that we are a premier home health service provider. We are not the typical home health care providers. We want to be intertwined with the communities and actually helping people by listening to their concerns, reaching out and advocating to leaders in our communities, politicians, whomever, to be able to provide better resources for necessities for people, whether it's transportation, meals, whatever people need, because we have so many people struggling. And as you shared, like with your mom, a lot of chronic pain is because of issues that we may be having in life, whether it's be physical, emotional, spiritual. They manifest themselves with pain. And when you sit down as a physical therapist or social worker or even an occupational therapist, listening to people actually complain, and you look at the root causes of it, a lot of it is because they don't have the necessary resources that they need. And I'm the individual or person that's going to advocate that your basic needs be met.
I love
And
that. Because it is
once you're met,
it's a holistic model. It's a systems way of thinking.
yep,
And this even more confirms that you're a curvy hustler, but definitely somebody that I want in my network of resources,
yeah,
because you get it. We have shifted. The difference between the
mm,
20th and the 21st century is we are no longer in this individualistic consciousness. We are starting to understand that the individual is important in a collective, and that there's a
yep,
system and an ecosystem, and that it's made up of people, but those people are not lone wolfing it. That whole lone wolf, it's lonely at the top, but I can do it. And like, you didn't get there by yourself. I don't know who you're kidding.
that's true.
You did not get
That's
there
true.
by you didn't pop up. Even if you just popped up, guess what? You were placed. So like, I think we're just seeing that, and I see that as a lot of the feminine spirit of leadership being allowed. Many of the things that were taken out when women went into the workforce. You're too personable, you're too relational. You're too emotionally intelligent. You're too,
But
and now all of a sudden it's
know,
being a thing.
you know what? If it was a male, it would be called charisma.
Exactly. That's the thing. We didn't see, that's what I'm saying, the duality of it. We made it a
Yeah.
polarity, but really it
Mhm.
was a duality. We didn't see the other side of the coin. I keep saying,
Yeah.
if I were only to see a quarter with a heads up, and I didn't understand it, when I showed a tails, even though everything else looked like it and I was using it like a quarter, people would be confused. And I think that's what women like us coming into conversations that are not scared. Like, as much as the patriarchy acts like it's the be-all end-all, that structure was made to cause fear because it was easier to control people who felt that they were dependent on the system as it is, or the whatever, than to actually listen and to integrate and to relate and to do a lot of what women were doing in families, bringing together different pieces, or even being attacked and raped and having kids, and somehow they still could make it into a like, these are major things that people don't know how to do. Obviously they don't know how to bring in different cultures, and they don't, but women tend to do that. So I see that as we learned it. We learned how to play the game of the patriarchy structure. We have in ourselves a matriarchy, which is not just the opposite. It's actually a totally different system. It runs on circles and wisdom, and that, like I said, that seasons, and it's not the flip. And we are now, people like us, the embodiment of it. But people don't know where to put us. People don't understand, you know what I mean? Like, they see it, they're like, I kind of see it's the quarter, but I don't.
But Lisa, you're not meant to be in a box.
Exactly. That's the thing. There's not even any boxes. That's our conversation. That's why we have to have this. So I welcome you, and I thank you so much for having this openness, and where we can find you and how you're pulling it into healthcare, because it's a systemic healing. It's no longer an individual healing. It doesn't behoove us to have a bunch of independently wealthy, independently healthy, independently prosperous people because we get selfish. Lord of the Flies, that wonderful book, should have taught us it, but nobody's reading the damn book. 1984 should have taught us it. The Bible should have taught us it. Torah, you were 40 years in the desert for a reason, crying when you missed out on the milk and honey. Like, learn it. Right? Like, learn it already. So I feel like some of us are sort of putting the pieces together, and I so welcome you showing us how you're doing it in healthcare leadership, but just personal leadership, because that's where it's got to come, right? We've got to come out and start sort of stepping into our ministry and onto these stages we created and figuring it out. So thank you so much, Monique Caruth. Thank you so much for your leadership, doctor. And thank you so much of showing a different sense of authority in that alchemy, because it's beautiful. If anybody wants to speak or talk to her, I will have it on the show notes. You can directly, if you couldn't get it from her, to sort of just Google her up and follow her daily ministry, and sort of, allow yourself some of that, because we're all in this together, whether you like it or not. Thank you so much. Any last closing words or anything you'd like to give an advice, or did we sum it up?
You summed it up perfectly. As you said, the title, your purpose is in the process.
I love it. I'm going to end
in the process.
Purpose is that's going to be the title. I'm going to figure it out. The woman making the purpose the process. That's going to probably be the title. Thank you so much, Monique.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening into this episode of Owning Her Health with Dr. Lisa Holland, PT. To learn more about her personal and professional development service, visit her online at drlisahollandpt.com.